Hi, Assassins. I'm Brooke.
And I'm Cami.
Welcome to Bookish Realms.
We're just two girls who can't stop talking about fantasy books.
This episode covers chapters 11 through 16 of Crown of Midnight. Like in past episodes, the chapter summaries and character discussion are spoiler-free, but the rest of the pod does include spoilers for all of Throne of Glass. This podcast is for mature audiences only. Cami, take it away, girl.
Let's get into some chapter summaries. As a reminder, this is a non-spoiler section where we summarize the chapters we'll cover in this episode. So if you haven't read the entire series, but you have read chapters 11 through 16 of Crown of Midnight, you can listen to this section. Chapter 11. Tensions are high since Celaena has just revealed the king sent her to kill Archer. He reveals he's not directly involved in the rebels, but he has intel on a group loyal to Aelin Galathynius, the long-lost heir of Terrasen. According to him, this mysterious group believes Aelin is alive and rallying an army. Celaena, ever the strategist, strikes a dangerous bargain, giving Archer 4 weeks to tie up his affairs and spill the rebel secrets before staging his grand escape. Reporting back to Chaol, she plays her cards close to the chest, omitting the juiciest details. And just when the chapter seems to cool down, an emotionally charged exchange with Chaol leaves sparks flying as he lays bare his deep concern for her safety. Chapter 12. Masks, Mystery, and Mayhem. This masquerade ball at Davis's estate isn't just for show. With Archer's help, Celaena sneaks into the Lion's Den, aka Davis's office, unearthing a treasure trove, a book on word marks, and a cryptic riddle about seeing only with the eye. But before she can decode the mystery, Davis crashes the party with a Gloriella poisoned blade. The fight turns deadly, forcing Celaena to defend herself and slice Davis's throat. Poisoned and barely holding on, she stumbles back to the castle, where Chaol steps in to save the day. Chapter 13. Switching gears to Chaol's point of view, this chapter dives deep into the captain's turmoil as he cares for a poisoned and vulnerable Celaena. His concern isn't just professional, it's personal, raw, and full of unspoken emotion. When she finally awakens, Celaena recounts the deadly encounter with Davis. In a pivotal moment, Chaol decides to cover up her involvement, prioritizing her over his duty. The lines of loyalty are definitely starting to blur, and Chaol and Celaena's feelings for each other develop. Chapter 14. The Royal Library holds more than dusty books. It's a gateway to secrets. On a quest for answers, Celaena uncovers a hidden door behind an ancient tapestry. Descending into the forgotten catacombs, she encounters fake carvings and an iron door sealed with magic. The suspense peaks when glowing eyes stare back at her from the darkness. Something ancient and dangerous lurks beneath the castle, and it's not just old books and cobwebs. Chapter 15. A dinner honoring Prince Holland might sound harmless, but we get a chapter filled with danger and desire. As Rena Goldsmith performs, there's so much romantic tension between Celaena and Chaol, and we see all of it through Dorian's watchful eyes. His heartache leads him to a bittersweet decision to let go of his feelings for Celaena. But this isn't just a night of lost love. The king cast a chilling shadow, executing Rena and her companion for singing a forbidden magic. A brutal reminder that in this court, even a song can be a death sentence. Chapter 16. In a rare moment of vulnerability, Celaena confesses to Nehemia that her assassin's ledger isn't as bloody as it seems. She hasn't killed any of her assigned targets. Their bond deepens as they explore Elena's tomb together, uncovering an eye symbol that might crack the riddle wide open. Meanwhile, Nehemia offers to teach Celaena about word marks, adding another layer to their growing friendship. The political intrigue thickens as Archer drops names linked to the rebel cause. The chapter sets the stage for the next royal ball, but danger and destiny are closing in.
Welcome to Character Discussion. Here we'll cover what we've talked about each main character and some side characters, and track their character development. This section is also spoiler-free. Let's start with our girl, of course. We can't start with anybody else. Celaena. In these chapters, Celaena reveals more of her moral complexity, balancing self-preservation, loyalty, and justice. Her ruthless, practical nature is clear as she reflects, if she were a nice, decent person, she'd tell him to take his time to calm himself, but she wasn't a nice, decent person. This moment highlights her strategic mindset, shaped by survival, even as it contrasts with the compassion she often suppresses. Her interactions with Archer reinforce her deadly reputation. When she warns, if this party turns out to be nonsense, don't make me look like the fool. Archer's reply, I wouldn't dare, reflects the respect and fear she commands. Yet, Selena's disdain for the darker side of Rifthold's elite emerges as she notes, young woman, a year or two shy of 16, in Davis's company, hinting at her growing awareness of the moral rot around her. Selena's resilience is tested when attacked. She had him disabled and on the floor in a heartbeat, but not fast enough to avoid the sting of Davis's dagger slicing into her forearm. While her skill is undeniable, her vulnerability reminds us she is not invincible. The smell of Gloriella, a mild poison, intensifies this, bringing back traumatic memories of her capture and deepening her distrust. The most pivotal moment comes when she is told, "You are in a position of power and knowledge, and yet you disobey." This forces her to confront whether survival and freedom are enough, or she must rise against the forces she's enabling. Through these chapters, Selena evolves from a focused assassin to a woman grappling with her identity and choices. Her sharp edges remain, but her growing morality and reflections on her past hint at a deeper transformation to come. Next up, we have Dorian. We actually don't get too many POVs from Dorian in this set of chapters, other than the fact that he continues to struggle with Selena picking Kale over him. But he does have a nice self-reflection moment when he decides it is finally time for him to let her go. Hopefully in the next set of chapters, we'll get some more information about him, but this set of chapters, we don't really have much about him. Next, Kale. The night of Selena's attack is transformative for Kale. It was one of the longest nights of Kale's life. His reaction, tearing open her dress in a panic to treat her wound, reflects not just his fear for her life, but the depth of his emotional attachment. The calm and collected captain of the guard is gone, replaced by a man driven by a desperation and love. Kale's protective instincts intensify in the aftermath. Quote, "He was glad Davis was dead, because if Davis hadn't survived, Kale would have gone back to finish the job himself." This raw, almost feral reaction shows how deep he feels when Selena is threatened. For Kale, justice isn't enough. He would cross moral lines to protect her, which he's done before. Yet Kale's sense of duty doesn't entirely waver. His warning, "But the next time you do anything like this, I'm going to throw you in the dungeons," is both a testament to his frustration with Selena's recklessness and his determination to maintain some semblance of order, even as his feelings for her grow stronger. These chapters reveal Kale Westfall, who is no longer just a disciplined captain of the guard. His loyalty and love for Selena are pushing him into uncharted emotional territory, forcing him to reconcile his duty to the crown with his personal desires. Kale's growth lies in the struggle to find balance, and his vulnerability makes him one of the series' most relatable and compelling characters. Next up, we have our side characters. Nehemia. In these chapters, Nehemia's role as a fierce advocate for her people and a moral compass is brought into sharp focus. Her words and actions reveal the tension she feels as she navigates her personal relationships and her greater mission to fight for her homeland and its oppressed people. Nehemia's frustration with compromise is evident in her sharp remark, "How can I convince them that your soul isn't rotted?" This line speaks to the immense pressure she feels to justify her association in a court ruled by tyranny. Her loyalty to her people and the cause of freedom weighs heavily on her, and her disdain for those who serve the king, even for practical reasons, underscores her uncompromising moral stance. Her declaration, "With each person you kill, I am finding fewer and fewer excuses to remain your friend," is a powerful moment that reflects her internal conflict. Nehemia recognizes the suffering of many, including her friends, but she refuses to accept actions that she perceives as enabling oppression. This statement showcases her deep empathy for others while also illustrating the strain between personal relationships and her commitment to justice. Nehemia's words remind readers of the broad stakes at play. She serves as a voice for those who suffer in silence, pushing against complacency and urging others to consider the cost of their choices. Her unflinching honesty and unyielding dedication to her beliefs make her a compelling character who constantly challenges those around her to rise to a higher standard. These chapters highlight Nehemia as a complex and principled figure, balancing her fierce loyalty to her friends with her unshakable commitment to her people and their fight for freedom. Her presence adds layers of tension and urgency to the story, reinforcing the idea that struggles for justice require sacrifice and sometimes difficult truths. Aelin Galathinius. In these chapters, Aelin Galathinius, the long-lost heir of Terrasen, emerges as a figure of leader and intrigue. Whispers of her name among the people of Rifthold hint at the enduring power of her story, even in the face of her supposed death. Archer's revelation that there's a group that wants to put Aelin Galathinius back on Terrasen's throne highlights the hope she represents for a kingdom under oppression. Despite the passage of time and the claim that Aelin Galathinius is dead, rumors persist that she is alive, quietly gathering strength and allies to challenge the tyrannical rule of Otterland's king. This belief is deeply symbolic, reflecting the resilience of those who refuse to give up on freedom and justice. The notion that Aelin may be rising an army and seeking to re-establish court adds an air of mystery and excitement to the narrative. It introduces the possibility of rebellion, driven by the memory of Terrasen's glory under King Orlin. For the people, Aelin isn't just a lost queen. She's a rallying point, a figure who embodies the hope for a brighter future. This discussion of Aelin Galathinius enriches the story by tying the personal stakes of the characters to a broader, kingdom-wide struggle. Whether she is truly alive or merely a legend, her name carries weight, promising a reckoning that could reshape the world as the characters know it.
Let's explore this world. Here we cover the main world-building elements that come up in chapters 11 through 16. We'll revisit these places and world-building elements in other episodes. For today, this section is not spoiler-free, so if you haven't finished the entire series, please do not continue. But please come back when you have. All right, let's dive back into the magic of Aurelia, because in this book, we get so much more insight into how magic works and what its suppression means for the world. If you remember, we explored the disappearance of magic in the last episode, and it's still a central theme here. But things are getting even more layered. Let's break it down section by section. First up, the world before suppression. The text paints a vivid picture of just how diverse magic once was. Quote, wherever it came from, magic had countless variations, abilities to heal, to shapeshift, to summon flame or water or storm, to encourage the growth of crops and plants, to glimpse the future, and on and on. Most of those gifts had been watered down over the millennia, but for some rare strong ones, when they held on to their power for too long, the iron in their blood caused fainting spells. This shows us that magic wasn't just a tool, it was woven into every aspect of life. Healing, farming, and even glimpses of the future. It was all part of their world. And the mention of iron affecting blood, that hints at some deeper connections between magic and the body itself. But as we know, magic didn't just disappear. It was violently ripped away. One of the examples we get in this set of chapters is the execution of Rena Goldsmith's daughter, Kayleen. As she's being held prisoner by the king and his men, Rena says, quote, my daughter was 16 when you burned her. Her name was Kayleen, and she had eyes like thunderclouds. I still hear her voice in my dreams. And it doesn't stop there. She names others who suffered under the king's purge. Quote, my sister was 36. Her name was Lisa, and she had 2 boys who were her joy. My neighbor and his wife were 70. Their names were John and Estrel. They were killed because they dared try to protect my daughter when your men came for her. This isn't just about banning magic. It's a systematic, brutal attempt to erase it from the world, down to the memories of those who practiced it. The king isn't just killing people. He's trying to kill a culture, something that is rooted in the land and the people. But, of course, magic's too powerful to just vanish. We see forms of resistance that are both subtle and defiant. One of my favorite examples, through art and music, Rena herself is a symbol of this resistance. Quote, I have worked for 10 years to become famous enough to gain an invitation to this castle. 10 years so I could come here to sing the songs of magic that you tried to wipe out. That's powerful. Music as resistance? Love it. And then there's the preservation of secret knowledge, like the word marks. Selena found a book in the Palace Library in Throne of Glass, which we explored in our deep dives and in our standalone Maasverse episodes. Quote, titles like this had been burned with the rest of the books on magic. She had found one in the Palace Library, The Walking Dead, but that had been a fluke. It's a reminder that even in the heart of the king's power, some knowledge endures, hidden but not gone. Another layer we see is the economic fallout. The ban on magic didn't just disrupt individuals, it shattered entire livelihoods. Quote, fortunes had been broken upon the loss of magic. People who had made their living for years by harnessing its power were suddenly left with nothing. This isn't just a fantasy plot point. It's a reflection of how societies collapse when you rip away a cornerstone of their culture and economy. And then there's the king's justification. He wraps it all in a religious veneer. Quote, it is punishable by death to speak of or to encourage magic. It is an affront to the gods and an affront to me. But is it really about the gods? No. The text drops some hints that there's more going on here. As we heard earlier, quote, despite the king of Otterland's claim that magic was an affront to the divine, wherever it came from, magic had countless variations. It's clear the king's suppression isn't just about religion, it's about control, and that's a major theme we've been tracking. Speaking of connections in previous world-building sections, we've talked about how word marks and ancient magic still exist, beyond the king's reach. Like Mort said, quote, new magic doesn't. But the king cannot erase old spells made with older powers, like the word marks. Those ancient spells still hold. especially ones that imbue life. And we've seen how dangerous word marks can be. If someone like Cain can summon creatures, imagine what the king could do if he fully tapped into that power. And we know that the king is familiar with word marks and their power. So the suppression of magic isn't just a ban, it's a war on history, on culture, and the very fabric of this world. But as we've seen, magic is resilient. It's hidden, it's ancient, and it's not going down without a fight. When magic finally does return to Aurelia, it changes the entire landscape of this war and allows Aelin and our other key players to fight back on more even ground.
This is our analysis and foreshadowing section, which is not spoiler-free. We'll break down parts of the text that tie into or foreshadow future events in the series. If you have not read all of Throne of Glass, please do not continue.
We kick off the set of chapters with Celaena cornering Archer Finn in a carriage to question him about why the king sees him as a traitor. Archer panics, which is pretty funny, but he also says he's not a traitor, and he has information for Celaena about a group who the king would want to know about. He says, quote, "But this group, this one, he'd probably want to know more about. It seems like they recently learned that the king might be planning some new horror for us all, and they want to try to stop him."
Archer continues, but he does give us our first mention of Aelin Ashriver Galathinius, which I don't know about you, but when I first read this, I was like, oh, we both have on our Aelin shirts
we have our shirts on. Aelin Galathinius mentioned.
Yeah. I literally just remember when I first read this, because like everybody else on TikTok, I literally was like, who is this Aelin lady? Like, I keep seeing her on TikTok, and then when she finally came, I was like, oh, here she is. She is here. She is present.
Archer gives us more information about this group of people. He says, quote, "I've only heard my clients whispering about it every now and then, but there's a group that's formed right here in Rifthold, and they want to put Aelin Galathinius back on Terrasen's throne." Her heart stopped beating. Aelin Galathinius, the lost heir of Terrasen. And then she says, "Aelin Galathinius is dead," she breathed. Archer shook his head. They don't think so. They say she's alive and that she's raising an army against the king. She's looking to reestablish her court to find what's left of King Orlan's inner circle. And we just love Celaena's reaction to this. It's like, It's priceless. Also, I'm a Taylor Swift fan, so when she says, "Aelin Galathinius is dead," it's just like when Taylor goes, "The old Taylor can't come to the phone right now." Why? Oh, because she's dead. Brooke, you do not listen to Taylor Swift, but our listeners who do, you can tell me I'm right.
Yeah, I simply have no idea to the context of that, but like, period. So there's this other part in Crown of Midnight that happens like right after this exchange, and Celaena, like in her head, says, quote, "If these people actually claim to have met the heir to the throne, then she had to be an imposter." Again, this just like hints, there's literally hints everywhere throughout this book that like before we find out that Celaena is Aelin, that she literally is the queen. Like, she is the queen. She is Aelin Ashriver Galathinius. Like, when I first read that, I was like, holy shit, she literally just told us that she is actually her. Like, she literally just said that she is the queen, basically.
Yeah, it's like, it's so funny because like we did just skip right over that on our first read. Like, the only reason that Celaena would know that this woman that they're trying to put on the throne is an imposter is because she is Aelin. But like, you don't put that together. You just think like, oh, she just knows because everyone knows Aelin's dead. But that's not the case. There's no other reason that she would know that it's an imposter.
But again, like when we were rereading this, like through the lens that like what we know from the beginning, or like, sorry, what we know at the end, this was like all kind of set up in a heartbreaking way for Celaena, and like what is her like next thought, you know? So there's this quote where it says, "Was it mere coincidence that Nehemia had mentioned Terrasen's court that morning? That Terrasen was the one force capable of standing against the king, if it could get to his feet again, with or without the true heir. But Nehemia had sworn to never lie to her. If she'd known anything, she would have said it."
That betrayal it just goes so deep because also like she says, was it a mere coincidence that Nehemia had mentioned Terrasen's court again that morning? And like at the end of this book and like in Empire of Storms, when we learn more about Nehemia's involvement, like nothing was a coincidence with Nehemia. Nehemia went to Rifthold knowing who she was looking for, knowing that like, you know, Aelin Ash River Galathinius would have Brandon's mark on her forehead, that she'd have the Ash River eyes. And so Selena thinking like, oh, is it a coincidence? Like, it's so upsetting because nothing was a coincidence. She was literally like set up the whole time. And like, that's her one friend. That's her one girlfriend.
I think that it's really interesting here too, because like up until this point, like she's only known betrayal from the people that she cares about. And it's just really sad. Like she's really seeking out like these girl friendships. And I feel like she doesn't really gain like a good solid friend until Lysandra comes around.
So let's go back to that carriage scene. Before Selena lets Archer go, they make an agreement. She'll let him live and fake his death like she's done for everyone else, and he'll give her the intel that she needs. Archer invites her to a party at his client's house, Davis, who he believes is involved in the movement. So we get to that party, and it's a masquerade, obviously, because SJM loves her masquerades. Selena's dressed like a swan, which I just think is really interesting because swans usually symbolize like transformation and like changing to something new. If you've ever seen like Black Swan, like that's part of it. So seeing her dressed as a swan is interesting when we know that at the end of this book, she starts her transformation into Aelin Ash River Galathinius.
So when she gets to this party, Selena finds herself in Davis's office thanks to Archer's help. Okay. So she quickly spots a book that she's like, this book is simply out of place. Quote, she was about to turn around when a title caught her eye. A book with a single word mark written on the spine in blood red ink. She pulled it out and rushed to the desk, setting down the candle as she opened the book. It was full of word marks, every page covered with them, and with words in a language she didn't recognize. Nehemia had said it was secret knowledge, that the word marks were so old they'd been forgotten for centuries. Titles like this had been burned with the rest of the books on magic. She had found one in the palace library, The Walking Dead, but that had been a fluke. The art of using the word marks was lost. Only Nehemia's family knew how to properly use their power. But here, in her hands, she flipped through the book. It is just so fucking interesting that the book is full of word marks and a language Selena doesn't recognize. We will get more into the language of this in our Crown of Midnight Massverse Connections episode when we finish like the Crown of Midnight deep dives. But it's just really interesting. Like we have not heard about this language before other than the word marks.
And what's inside this book, another thing that SJM loves, she loves her masquerades and she loves her riddles. The riddle inside of this book is, it is only with the eye that one can see rightly. So solving this riddle is the key to another riddle, which eventually leads Selena to find the location of all the word keys, or at least like the original locations. Rereading this was really funny because one of my favorite books is The Little Prince, which I have to believe is the inspiration for this riddle and this line of like, it is only with the eye that one can see rightly, because the line in that book is, it is only with the heart that one can see rightly. What is essential is invisible to the eye. And I just want to sit SJM down and be like, did you read this book? Is this where this comes from?
It's just so crazy, like how early on in Crown of Midnight sets up the whole rest of the series. Like this riddle that she finds in this book that's in Davis's office leads her to finding the word keys because she is presented with that other riddle. And the word keys are literally like the central focus of like this whole entire series. So how is this all connected to Nehemia's betrayal? Well, at the end of this book, Archer is confessing to Selena, right? He reveals that him and Nehemia have known about this riddle for 5 fucking years. For 5 years. 5 years they've known about this riddle. They've known about like what this means. And like this all goes into this betrayal because it's like Nehemia just knew the whole fucking time. Like she knew the whole time. Like she knew about the riddle. She knew about Selena being Aelin. And she just couldn't like she just simply just doesn't give a fuck. She's like, I got a mission. I'm here for a mission. And that's it. That's all.
And like we mentioned, like this book was literally planted for Selena to find in Davis's office. Archer in that confessional at the end of this book literally says, we knew that you needed to find the riddle because we knew that you'd be the one to be able to solve it. And like you said, like it's just another thing that Selena finds out that she's being lied to about.
Let's continue talking about Selena and Nehemia's relationship. So in chapter 16, Nehemia and Selena are having breakfast. And once again, Nehemia is laying down the guilt trip for Selena about working and killing for the king. Quote, I want you to look me in the eye and tell me that you think your freedom is worth this price.
Again, like, I do not agree with what Nehemia does to Selena, the way that she uses her, the way that, like, she takes Selena's trust for her and essentially turns Selena into a pawn in Nehemia's game. I do understand this concern, and we've talked about this before, but if Selena had really been killing for the king and following his orders, it really would have corrupted her as a character for us. It would have corrupted her standing as a queen and like as a person. So I do think this quote from Nehemia is a really valid comment in the context of Nehemia thinks Selena's killing people for the king.
The crazy thing about this, Nehemia just continues to lay it on even thicker when Selena counters and she says, and what is so wrong with wanting my freedom? Haven't I suffered enough to deserve it? So what if the means are unpleasant? Like, Selena just wants peace. Like, she simply just wants peace, but she also knows the truth. Like, she knows that, like, she hasn't killed anyone. She knows that, like, there's nothing to weigh on her conscience because she hasn't been following through with these orders.
And Nehemia's reply to, like, it's a deep cut. She says, quote, I won't deny that you've suffered, Alentia, but there are thousands more who have also suffered and suffered more, and they do not sell themselves to the king to get what they too deserve. With each person you kill, I'm finding fewer and fewer excuses for remaining your friend. It's so bad.
Yeah, it's really fucked up. Like, also when you think about it, like in the moment, I feel like when you first read this, you're like, damn, that sucks. But like also like thinking of it in the context of like what we know about Nehemia and like how she betrays Selena, like it's even more of a fucked up thing to say because like ultimately like Nehemia was never like a true friend to Selena. Like even if she claims like I'm your bestie, like I'm here for you, like I feel like as a reader, like I can never fully trust the fact that like she was besties with her because like you literally used her. So like for you to say with each person you kill, I'm finding fewer and fewer excuses for remaining your friend, like girl, you were never her friend to begin with. So like for you to say that to her, knowing that you have a purpose also, which is to gain the freedom of your people, Selena just wants her own freedom, you know?
I will say, like, Nehemia is always pushing Selena to think outside herself, like to think of the slaves, the prisoners, the people who are tortured. But I also really hate that hole that we fall into, like as humans, of like, oh, because there are people who are suffering more, like I can't complain about my suffering. I can't want things because other people are suffering more. It's just not a valid argument in any means. Like your suffering, your emotions don't have to be compared to others to be valid. And I understand like why Nehemia does it, because I think a lot of these comments that she makes to Selena are like prompting her to think about these things as like a queen would. Like we've said before, like, you know, when I'm not president of anything, maybe like SJM's fan club, but like it is important for someone like as young as Selena to have someone like Nehemia is a princess and she does have to think about her people. And Selena's not in that mindset yet. So I do understand some of these moments, but like at the end of the day, like Nehemia was never a true friend to her. So it is just kind of bogus to say this shit.
All of this guilt tripping by Nehemia prompts Selena to tell her truth. So I guess like the guilt trip worked a little bit in Nehemia's defense because she ends up telling Nehemia like she hasn't killed anyone for the king. Selena explains like her bargain with the king's targets and how she fakes their death. Then she also shares a little bit about Archer and how he's going to give her information about a rebel group. And Nehemia reacts here in an interesting way because she didn't leave the movement until literally a week before she died. Quote, Selena briefly explained what he told her about the people involved in putting Terrason's lost heir back on the throne, even telling her what had happened with Davis. Nehemia's face paled. When Selena finished, Nehemia took another trembling sip of tea. And do you trust Archer?
This is really interesting because I think in that moment, Selena thinks that Nehemia is trembling because of everything she just shared, especially because Selena does share the close call that she had with Davis, like the Gloriella and all of that. But in hindsight, knowing that, like you said, Nehemia ends up leaving the rebel movement that she's in with Archer essentially a week before she dies, I think Nehemia also starts putting together, hey, like this is a lot more dangerous than I thought. And her hand, again, this is just speculation, but I do think her hand could be trembling here because she's starting to see like how far Archer is willing to go for this movement. This trembling hand here, it could be taken in a few different ways.
No, I definitely agree with you. I think like on a first read, you don't really catch it, but then when you reread it again, you're like,
Mhm.
I have some questions about this. And honestly, this isn't the only thing that Selena reveals in this conversation. She takes Nehemia to Elena's tomb and introduces her to Mort, which again, it's so hard to read through on a reread because Nehemia's already been to this tomb several times, not just once, several times. And she's even the one who cleaned up the body of the Ritter Act. So like she's familiar with these catacombs. She's familiar with Elena's tomb. And Nehemia just acts like she's never been there before, which is so fucking frustrating.
I will say though, like bringing Nehemia down there was good because as they continue looking around the tomb together, Selena notices like the constellations on the floor, which we've talked about a few different times. There are all these like stars and word marks and things on the floor that are very interesting. But Selena specifically notices the constellation that depicts the Lord of the North. And knowing that it's Elena's tomb, who is also connected to Harrison, Selena notices that the eye, like the stag's eyes, are pointing toward a spot on the wall that is also an eye. So there's an eye etched into this wall.
And Selena even thinks to herself, quote, "It is only with the eye that one can see rightly. There was no way she was that lucky. Surely it was more than a coincidence." Calming her growing excitement, she lifted onto her toes to see into the eye. Again, this just makes me so sad for her because like the truth is that she isn't that lucky. Like it was literally all planned for her. And in this scene, like she only figures out this part of the riddle and that she has to look through the eye shaped hole in the wall. But Nehemia like continues to deceive her here. Like when Selena shares the riddle she found in the book, Nehemia calls it an idle world's nonsense, which is it's literally just such a lot.
SJM, like we've said, she loves her riddles. She loves like making you and the character figure things out. And I love like this whole like, oh, I'm going to look through the eye. Like my favorite movie is National Treasure. And this entire scene is giving that. It's giving, let's steal the Declaration of Independence. But like you said, Nehemia like intentionally throws Selena off the scent, essentially. Like she tells her like, it can't be that easy. It is just a coincidence. And Selena gets like embarrassed. She says like her cheeks like blush red. She feels like foolish to think that one, the riddle in Davis's book could even be connected to the tomb, and that two, like it could be solved that easily. Like again, Nehemia is making Selena question herself and her gut instincts when Selena is right. She just is not looking with the right eye. She has to look with a different eye.
And I feel like it adds like another level of betrayal because we all know that Selena doesn't love to bring people in on her plans. And the fact that like the two times up until this point that she has brought somebody into her plans, like one, her lover dies, two, her best friend who thought was her best friend literally betrays her.
Well, and also like the whole other layer of betrayal. This is Elena's tomb, who is literally like Aylin's ancestor. And Elena and Nehemia are actually like plotting together as well. Your ancestor who's supposed to be on your side, and we are Elena haters, but like
yes,
these two people, like you're in a tomb of your ancestor and you're the only one not in on the whole game. That's fucked up.
It's super fucked up. Let's switch gears a little bit because we've talked a lot about like betrayal and like Nehemia, who's a fucking certified liar. But let's switch gears to somebody who isn't lying to Selena every time they fucking talk, which is Kale. He does keep things from her later on in this book, but let's talk about their love story.
So last episode, we broke down Kale's like absolute jealousy over Selena going to dinner with Archer and her threat of, I'll see you tomorrow. I'm not coming home tonight. So when Selena does come home, his relief is like so visible. He's, I think, one, just like glad that she's safe, but two, also he's like, thank God she didn't sleep with him. So she tells him like, you know, what she learned from Archer. She does leave some key things out, things that like she just can't tell him because of the things that she's doing. And at the end of this whole thing, Kale tells Selena, be careful. And again, just like in previous times, this kind of sets her off. She keeps thinking that Kale is saying these things, like saying these comments, like, be careful, like, you know, watch out, because he sees her as someone who is weak or like needs protecting. But oh boy, does Kale clarify.
He says, quote, "He took a step towards her, but she held her ground. Believe me, Selena," he snarled, his eyes flashing. "I know you can look after yourself, but I worry because I care. God's help me. I know I shouldn't, but I do. So I will always tell you to be careful because I will always care what happens. Before we get into this, can I tell you, when it says like he snarled, his eyes flashing, I literally feel like I just picture like an animal in my head, like literally like like a lion when they like snarl and they're like their eyes are like crazy. That's like how I picture this in my head. I think it's so
It's
like
so weird.
it's so weird. Like if a man ever did that to me in real life, I simply would get the ick. But like in the book, I'm like, oh my God. Selena can literally only reply like, oh, like, okay, I guess you do care.
This moment like made me swoon because I love Kale. But I think
Mhm.
also one thing to note here is Kale's getting really good at expressing his emotions. What he says to her here is exactly what we've been breaking down in character
Mhm.
development and in this entire book as we like, and last book, as we break down like their relationship and the slow burn and everything that happens is he knows that he shouldn't care. He can't care because
Mhm.
he's captain of the guard and he's got all these duties, but he really can't help himself. And he says it there. He's like, I know I shouldn't care, but I do. Like he literally says, like,
Mhm.
God's help me. He will always care what happens. And like that hits so different because like at the end of the series, like he proves that to be true. Like he will
Mhm.
always care. And moments like these between Kale and Selena don't stop there.
When Selena comes back after killing Davis and is fighting the effects of the Gloriella poison, Kale absolutely loses his shit. And like, I think it's super sweet in this moment, but it also like broke my heart to see her thought process while like trying to make it back to the castle, like before the poison sets in. Like, she's like, I just need to find somewhere safe. I need to find somewhere safe, which like, I don't know about you, Cammy, but like, I feel like as a woman, that's such like a real thing. Like when you're like super fucked up and you're like super drunk or whatever, and you're like, okay, I can't black out yet. I need to wait until I get somewhere safe. It just also is like it's such a sweet moment too because like she does see that like safe person in Kale, but it also is a dark memory for her because this is the same poison that was used the night that she was captured. So even like when she talks about it in the moment, like she's like the smell of the Gloriella, like she'll never forget that because of just the traumatic shit that happens that night. Like the PTSD is really real in this section. It's really sad.
It's also like so interesting. Like you said, like she's looking for somewhere safe. Like she literally
Mhm.
thinks like there's one door down this hall she had to reach, one room where she'd be safe. And she goes to Kale's room. But I think when you add in like, yes, the last time that she was poisoned with this was when she lost Sam. And now that she's poisoned with it again and she's looking for Kale, like it's a really like sweet full circle moment because that night, the first night that she was poisoned with Gloriella, like when she was captured, it was, it started the events of like one of the worst years of her life. Like
Mhm.
there was no place safe to go. But this time when she's poisoned with it again, there is some place safe to go. And it's Kale's room.
And honestly, like the whole like montage of Kale taking care of Selena all night is heartbreaking. Like this is literally his worst nightmare, and like I think he like says that, like he explicitly says like it was the longest night for him or something like that. And this is like one of his fears. Like whenever she was going on a mission, like literally his biggest fear. Like he can't help but show how he cares for Selena. Like he can't like help but show that he cares, regardless of the fact that she literally is like covered in blood. She's like dead ass, like Carrie style covered in blood. And it's not her own. But like I also like vividly remember him being like, where is this coming from? Like, where is this blood coming from? Because she was wearing so many different layers that he couldn't like determine if the blood was hers or not. And that's gotta be like a scary thing because I'm like picturing like the dresses from like Bridgerton, like the 7 layer, like the
Mm-hmm.
corset, this a million layers. I will say I am a certified kill hater, but in these chapters, I can't be mad.
Yeah. So he finally, like, he gets her healers and help and everything. And then he sends his men out to collect information, which is Kale by the time that, like, he puts Lena in bed, like, he knows what has happened with Davis. And his reaction is it's good. He says, quote, he was glad Davis was dead because if Davis had survived, Kale would have gone back to finish the job himself. And it's so good because the one time Kale has killed someone, it was in Selena's name. So I love him.
Yeah.
Kale is really fucked up by this whole experience. You can really tell like it shook him to his core. And when she wakes up, he makes a real choice here. He tells her that he's going to cover for her despite what it could do to his job, his relationship with the king, like his standing in the castle. He tells her several times like he'll deal with it if it causes trouble for him. And I just love that like in this moment when faced with the choice of like my duty, my honor, or Selena, he chooses her, even though that's a choice that really he's been dreading to make. That's the choice he hasn't wanted to have to come to, and he has to face it head on in honestly like the most traumatizing way possible.
I feel like there's so many first acts of like defiance in this set of chapters because like ultimately this was his first step of defiance too against the king, because then like we know that like he does end up joining the movement as well too at some point and switching sides.
That's just the start of like some of the sweet moments that we get between the two of them. We also get this entire dinner scene between the two of them when Rena Goldsmith is performing. And Kale and Selena are just so sweet in these moments. It really kind of starts off with like Kale's men are all kind of like talking and poking fun at each other. And Selena notices that, quote, and they respected him too, always glancing at him for approval, for confirmation, for support. And I just think this is really cute. Like, to see Kale interacting with who he considers his friends, who he considers his men, and the fact that they respect him is like, it's hot. Like, it's nice to see your partner kind of like in their element. And granted, they're not together yet at this point, but it also, I feel like, makes her feel like she's part of it, you know?
Their banter in this moment is so fucking cute. I love it. 10 out of 10.
And when Reina's song makes Selena cry, he holds her hand beneath the table. Quote, but then a warm, callous hand grasped hers beneath the table, and she turned her head to find Kale looking at her. He smiled slightly, and she knew he understood. So Selena looked at her captain of the guard and smiled back.
I feel like this moment also is just like, it's just like such a sweet moment because it's Kale crossing lines again. It's him blurring that like a hard line that he had with these emotions and these new like physical boundaries too. Like they're holding hands in a crowded room, like people could actually see them, and like the fact that like Kale just simply doesn't care anymore. He just is like, if you see me holding her hand, like I really don't know what to tell you because I'm gonna do it regardless. And it's just like also such like a sweet and intimate moment. Like you only simply do that with somebody that you feel safe and comfortable around. And also like Selena's like, that's my captain of the guard.
I love that line. I love that she says that she looked at her captain of the guard.
But we also get this moment from Dorian's POV. Quote, but Selena and Kale just sat there staring at each other, and not just staring, but something more than that. Dorian stopped hearing the music. She had never looked at him like that, not once, not even for a heartbeat. Rena was finishing her song, and Dorian tore his eyes away from them. He didn't think anything had happened between them, not yet. Kale was stubborn and loyal enough to never make his move, or even to realize that he looked at Selena the same way she looked at him. It's just really sad because I love Dorian, and like Dorian is really upset by this realization that Selena has much deeper feelings for Kale than she ever did for him. But it is also really sweet to see through his eyes that like not only are like Selena and Kale in their own like little bubble of like we're in love, but like other people are noticing that. Like other people are noticing that like it's not just like he's the captain of the guard and she's his subordinate. Like they're actually in love.
And I think like in the context of, oh, they were only together for 7 days, and like me pushing like, okay, but it feels like longer because of like this slow burn. I think this is a really good thing to reference of like, it really reminds us that what they shared was real. Even if it was only 7 days, they were building up a friendship for so long. They had all these like intimate moments. Like this is before anything has happened between the two of them. Like I don't think anything happens between the two of them until like 2 episodes from now is when we get like action between the two of them.
Yeah.
But it is just like really evident to everyone around them. And it's that slow burn.
It really is. And honestly, like we can start like shifting the conversation more towards Dorian because we are talking about him. Because I love Dorian. But after he saw the way that they looked at each other, Dorian gives us one of the most iconic lines. This is my favorite part of these set of chapters. Dorian took a long, long breath. He would move on because he would not be like the ancient kings in the songs and keep her for himself. She deserved a loyal, brave knight who saw her for what she was and did not fear her. And he deserved someone who would look at him like that, even if the love wouldn't be the same, even if the girl wouldn't be her. So Dorian closed his eyes and took another long breath. And when he opened his eyes, he let her go. Like, Dorian, me and Cami, we have really good jobs. Like, we're good people. Like, we will come to your rescue, king. Like, we simply will come to your rescue.
I will be straight for Dorian. I I realistically am only straight for fantasy fictional men. So whatever you need, buddy, I got you. Like, that's my crown prince.
Honestly, it's just sad that he doesn't really get like this by the end of the series, like in reality. Like, obviously, like Sorsha gives him some kind of love, like, but that ends in a very tragic way, like a very fucking tragic way. And we love him in Manon, but like it's not a confirmation of like a happily ever after that we would have wanted for Dorian. It's just really upsetting because like him and Manon, like I would love, Sarah, if you're listening to this, which I hope you are, but yeah, anyways, I would love like even just like a 50-page novella. Like I'll take a 50-page novella on the two of them. Like I just want to know like what happens with them, because I think that like the way that Dorian shifts throughout this series, like Manon is his person, and for Manon, he is her person, which we would have never thought we would say that, but like obviously we'll get into more of Manon's arc when we get to Air of Fire. But it just is really so sad that like for him this reality doesn't come true. Like he doesn't get that like love. But I also just wonder, is it because he is so different? Like with his magic and like with how he is, and like does he not find someone because nobody can match his power like how Aelin could have?
When you were like saying that, like that's what I thought of like, yes, this is what Dorian in Crown of Midnight wants, but what does Dorian at the end of Kingdom of Ash want? You know, and I think like you said, he changes so much in his perspective, and now he's king, so like that adds a whole other layer, because I feel like yes, Dorian explores the idea of being king, and like he knows that he will be king eventually in Throne of Glass, in Crown of Midnight, even in Air of Fire, but that reality comes much faster and much sooner than he thought. And when him and Manon start hooking up, he even says, like, I don't want, like, human women are too breakable. You know, I think that's what he says to her. And obviously that's, you know, partly because of what happened to Sorsha. But, like, I do wonder if Dorian at the end of Kingdom of Ash would still say, like, that's what he wants. You know, he wants someone to look at him like that, with that kind of love. Or is it something else that he wants? Like someone, like you said, like that matches his power and matches his energy.
And you know what's crazy? I think it's also like goes to a testament of like this is boy Dorian that we have right now. Like when we get Dorian at the end, like we have man Dorian. Like this is Crown Prince Dorian. We get King Dorian. Like he needs a queen that is going to be able to, I think like he just needs somebody that's going to be able to match his energy. And I think that like Manon in a sense could, but like he also knows that like he can't trap Manon. He can't cage Manon. Manon is her own woman. And like that's essentially why I think that like yes, they have love for each other. And I think that like in another realm, in another lifetime, like that could have worked for them. But like he's never going to ask her to step away from the witches, and she wouldn't ask that of him either. And honestly, Dorian's kind of going through it in general. Like within these set of chapters, we get another huge hint about Dorian's raw magic powers, which initially manifests as ice magic. We get this dual POV right as Celaena's entering the hidden section of the library, and Dorian jerks away. Quote, Dorian jerked awake at the sound of a clock chiming and found himself sweating despite the fierce cold in his bedroom. It was odd enough that he'd fallen asleep, but the frigid temperature was what struck him as most unusual. His windows were all sealed, his door shut, and yet his shallow breaths clouded in front of him. He sat up, his head aching. A nightmare of teeth and shadows and glinting daggers. Just a nightmare. Dorian shook his head, the temperature of the room already increasing. Perhaps it had only been a rogue draft. The nap was just a product of staying up too late last night. The nightmare probably triggered by hearing from Kale about Celaena's encounter. He gritted his teeth. Her job wasn't without risk, and though he was furious about what had happened, he had a feeling she'd only push him away further if he yelled at her about it. Dorian shook off the last bit of cold and walked to his dressing room to change his wrinkled tunic. As he turned, he could have sworn he caught a glimpse of a faint ring of frost around where his body had lain on the couch. But when he looked back to see it more fully, there was nothing there. What the actual fuck? It's just so crazy, like how like unaware he is of this magic. Like he has no idea that like obviously he's like hinting at like something doesn't seem right, but like he has no idea that like it's manifesting. It's his magic. Like it's literally his magic that is like creating these things to happen. And I feel like this is like the beginning of like when shit starts to ramp up. Like we start getting more of like the ice coming out, and like then we get to the point where like he realizes like, oh shit, like I do have magic. Which is crazy. Like it's just crazy.
I think it's interesting too, like how his magic kicks up, because it always seems tied to like his emotions or something that's happening. But here it's really interesting. And this is why we mentioned the dual POV, because as his magic kicks up, he wakes up and he thinks he's having a nightmare. And that's why he woke up. But that's also the exact moment that Selena is walking into the room, like behind the tapestry. So I wonder if it's also like his magic is warning him, like there's something bad happening, or like there's a warning sign that Selena is entering like a strange or like possibly dangerous part of the castle. And I think it's so interesting that he sits up and he says that his head hurts. His head is aching, because we know that several other characters who also have magic get headaches in the castle. So it's just like the whole thing, like his magic as it develops, it's really interesting because it does have parallels to like people we find out also have magic. I do think it's interesting that like the trigger here, like we get that dual POV, like this is right as Selena's entering a part of the castle that holds bad things. Like it's hidden behind another tapestry. And I do think I have to nerd out about the mechanism that she finds behind this tapestry. Like I love when things like this are explained in fantasy books, because she says like the mechanism to light this space, it's like there's a groove along the wall, and Selena figures out that she has to pour oil into this groove and then light that groove on fire, and it illuminates the whole wall. And that is like so clever. Again, maybe SJM has seen it in other books, or like maybe this is a way that like passages were lit up in history in the past and she just knew about it. But when little things like that are explained, it really like sets the world up in my brain. So I had to nerd out about it before we get into this hidden passage in the library.
I've read a lot of different like fantasy books and different authors, but I feel like one thing that SJM does the best is setting up a full movie picture in my brain. And when this part happens, like I vividly just remember like in my brain being like seeing it like going across the thing, and like it like seeing it in my brain like light up. Like it's just the way that she writes is so crazy, because it really does set off like a whole movie happening in my head. Anyways, she follows the path in and begins exploring this new section. As we mentioned before, we will be exploring all the libraries in the Maasverse in a standalone episode because they're very interesting. But the library passage spirals down. Selena finds some interesting things along this path. One, there's depictions of fate everywhere, which is how Selena knows that there is no way that the king knows that this passage exists, because they would have defaced it by now. He would have been like, bye-bye, this is going out of here. Two, there's iron everywhere. Everywhere.
Quote, the iron door was unremarkable, though undeniably impenetrable. Its studded surface was like a slab of starless sky. Selena stretched out a hand, but stopped before her fingers could graze the metal. Why was it made entirely of iron? Iron was the one element immune to magic. She remembered that much. And then she kind of talks about like all the different magic wielders and what they could do, and how if they held on to their power for too long, the iron in their blood caused fainting spells. And then she continues with the doors. She says she had seen hundreds of doors in the castle, doors of wood, of bronze, of glass, but never one of solid iron. This one was ancient, from a time when an iron door meant something.
We will be discussing this in a Massverse episode because if you know, you know. In Throne of Glass, at least, we get a full confirmation that iron is bad for magic wielders, which, like, we see that in Kingdom of Ash when Aelin, our poor sister, is stuck in this iron box with that iron mask on her face, with iron shackles on her, all meant to stifle her magic and keep her controlled, which is what it does. Like, it does what it's supposed to do. And it holds her for, I think it was, 2 months that she was held for? So that whole entire 2 months, like, the iron is holding her. And I think it's also really interesting because, like, not only does the iron stifle her magic, but it also stifles Dorian's magic too. So it's just like, it's crazy to think that, like, the strongest people, like, their magic is being stifled by this metal, like, by iron.
Yeah, we're having a whole, like, Massverse standalone episode on iron because it's something that must be explored.
Yes.
So Celaena continues exploring this door and she wonders if it's meant to keep something in or keep something out. And then, because she is braver than the troops, she slides her dagger underneath to see if she can see a reflection of what's behind this door. And she sees 2 green gold eyes beaming back at her. We've said this before, but this could literally just never be me. I would never do this. I would run in the opposite direction.
I wouldn't even be down there. I simply wouldn't even be down there.
Yeah, I would not be a good female main character for a fantasy book.
No.
Because it would end with me running away.
My book would be about 2 pages long. She faces conflict. She simply went home. Like,
she did not want to be here.
No, she did not.
But she tries to convince herself that these 2 eyes are just an animal. It's like a rat. It's just, you know, she really does not entertain the idea that it could be something more, even though, like, we know that in past passageways, she has found, like, the Rotaract. I mean, she has the experience to think that it could be something else, but I think she just tries to tell herself, like, it's not. It's just a rat.
Yeah. And, like, as we continue our Crown of Midnight deep dives, we'll continue to discover, like, this creature and how it was most definitely not a rat. And we're going to keep referring back to this quote from the first book because this is such, like, an interesting thing that, in my opinion, is very prevalent in all 3 of the worlds. But libraries were full of ideas, perhaps the most dangerous and powerful of all weapons. Like, it's insane, like, how much the libraries have to do with so many things.
We continue to see this, and it's just something that's outside of the norm. Like, you typically in a library, you expect books. You expect like, there are things you expect in a library, and you do not expect, like, weird creatures, hidden doors, hidden passageways. So when SJM writes in Throne of Glass book 1, like, they're the most dangerous and powerful of all weapons, like, she holds true to her word. She makes them dangerous and powerful. So it's just, I don't know what you're up to, SJM, but it's something.
And next, our favorite moments. These are just our favorite moments in this set of chapters that we really loved. I'll kick us off here. So in this set of chapters, I have 2 moments that stuck out to me. The first one was when Davis catches Celaena in his office and she is explaining to the house that the housekeeper let her in. She starts to stumble and rush through her words. My betrothed left me. She goes on to question. Honestly, she sometimes wondered if there was something a bit wrong with her for being able to cry so easy. I think it's just actually so funny to me. Like, this humor breaks up the shit that is about to go down with Davis, but it's also funny that she thinks about this, like, so quick on her feet. And I think this essentially is, like, why she is so good at what she does, because she's able to just, like, think of something like that. Like, me personally, I would have been sitting there like, I don't know. I don't know how I got here. But she's like, the maid, my betrothed. Like, she's got like the little lip quiver. She's crying, like, literally an Oscar. She needs an Oscar, our good sis. And my absolute favorite moment from this set of chapters is when Dorian is reflecting on when Celaena and Kill are looking at each other, and he is feeling bits of jealousy, but he tells himself he would move on because he would not be like the ancient kings in the songs and keep her for himself. She deserved a loyal, brave knight who saw her for what she was and did not fear her, and he deserved someone who would look at him like that, even if the love wouldn't be the same, even if the girl wouldn't be her. I really like this moment for two reasons. One, I think that this is the turning point for Dorian. He begins to start taking his own path, and I feel like this is when he kind of starts to grow as a character, but it also reflects on his relationship with Manon. And I'm not going to touch more on that because we talked about it in the analysis and foreshadowing. But the other reason why I really like this is because it hints at what Celaena essentially gets, right? Like, Celaena gets somebody who is her brave knight and sees who she is and doesn't fear her. Rowan encompasses all of those things. He lets her be herself without judgment, but he also sees her for who she is at her core and loves her regardless of what anything is. And he for damn sure is not scared of her because he literally punches her in the face. Like, he also knows that like he can like whoop her ass if he actually like simply had to. So like he's like, you can do all that talking, sister, but like ultimately like that I'm the big man around here. Like, I think it's just so funny. But I don't know. I just love that. I love that like little bit moment from Dorian.
My favorite moment, I eat up any scene having to do with music. So Rena Goldsmith's performance was everything to me. And it's really in line with how SJM describes music in like as a whole in all of her series. Even as Rena sings a song that is like technically outlawed, Celaena says, perhaps her voice could conquer even a tyrant's heart. Perhaps there was an unstoppable magic inherent in music and art. And she's not the only one that's like caught up in this moment and the music. Dorian says, Rena Goldsmith's unearthly music wove through the cavernous space, wrapping them in a spell he would have called magic had he not known better. I just love the way that like music has this like transformative trance-like effect, not just in Throne of Glass, but like the Maasverse as a whole. And I love that like Celaena / Aelin, who is like such a strong queen, she has so much magic, she has so much power. In this moment, she thinks like music could save us, like music could change his heart, and that is just really powerful because she is so powerful, and she sees like, you know, music could also do it. And I love that. My second favorite moment, unfortunately, is a sad one because it is when Rena Goldsmith is about to be executed by the king and his men. As an English major, the structure of this entire scene is just so good, despite how sad it is. Each line that Rena says is followed by a movement that brings her execution closer, and it creates this like almost like staccato way of reading this that I just love. The way SJM wrote this scene, like it doesn't allow you to like read it quickly or like skip past it. You're really forced to sit with Rena as she lists off her dead and honestly gets closer to death herself. It starts with the guards shoved her head down on the block, and then Rena starts talking. So that's the first movement, is head down on the block. Rena says, my daughter was 16. She went on. Tears ran over the bridge of her nose and onto the block, but her voice remained strong and loud. 16 when you burned her. Her name was Kayleen, and she had eyes like thunderclouds. I still hear her voice in my dreams. And again, Rena gets closer to death with another movement. The king jerks his chin and calls the executioner forward. But Rena continues. My sister was 36. Her name was Lisa, and she had 2 boys who were her joy. And again, we get another movement. The executioner raises his axe. And then Rena talks again. My neighbor and his wife were 70. Their names were John and Estrel. They were killed because they dared try to protect my daughter when your men came for her. And then it ends with Rena Goldsmith was still reciting her list of the dead when the axe fell. Again, this is just like masterful to me. And I'm just like, I'm such an English major nerd. I love these things, but the way it's written like makes you stop and really take in all of the people that Rena has lost at the king's hand. And you realize like every movement brings her closer to like getting her head chopped off. SJM does these death scenes like this just really well. And it just really stuck with me. Like the way that it was written, it doesn't let you like skip past it, which is the whole point. Like she is honoring her dead in her last moments of life. So that was my favorite moment.
That was a good one. That whole scene was just like, rereading it, I remember being like, holy shit, I forgot she like's literally off with the head right after she sings. Like they took her head off. It's really sad. We will end with some final thoughts about what we thought about these chapters. So rereading the set of chapters was really exciting because this is the first mention of Aelin. And I feel like this is really the point in time when the story begins to take a turn. Again, like kind of how I talked about in the beginning, from a story about an assassin to the story that is it truly becomes like throughout the rest of the series. We get hints at the word keys, we get hints at the possible rebellion, the riddle that helps Celaena figure out where the word keys are, but also we get when Celaena first goes into the catacombs of the library, and this also starts to hint a deeper story is ahead. During the reread, it also reminded me of how much I loved this book, because the fact that we're only in chapters 11 through 16 and like just knowing like how much more is to come in this book, it is crazy to me. But it also brought back a lot of memories like into the forefront of my mind of like, oh shit, like she does learn about the word keys this early on. Like she learns about like so many things so quickly. And I think that like it just made me cherish this book a little bit more, like specifically like just this set of chapters and what all occurs in the 5 chapters that we did read. So yeah, I was a stan for this book. So, and I continue to be a stan for this book.
Yeah, there is so much to love in this set of chapters. What really stuck with me in terms of like final thoughts is Celaena. There's so many times in these chapters where she refers to herself in these really negative ways. So like my first quote is, "A small wretched part of her was fairly smug at the sight of him cowering." Like her calling herself wretched. Then my second quote is, "If she were a nice, decent person, she'd tell him to take the time to calm himself, to right his mind. But she wasn't a nice, decent person. And his panic was giving his tongue free rein. So she let him go on." Again, she like calls herself wretched. She calls herself like she's not a nice or decent person. And then the last one is, it was in your favorite moments, but she says, honestly, sometimes she wondered if there was something a bit wrong with her for being able to cry so easily. Again, like she sees something that is like fundamentally wrong with her. Like she does not see herself as good or decent or kind. And this happens a lot earlier in the series. Even in Throne of Glass, Celaena sees herself in like a really negative light. It makes me really sad, but I think it's also interesting when we think about the next book being Heir of Fire. Celaena is forced to face like the deepest, darkest parts of herself. And to some extent, like we have to realize that Celaena does not like who she is. She doesn't see herself as having positive qualities, which affects, and it really gets in the way of her stepping into her power and seeing herself as someone who is worthy of being queen. When she goes to Wendlyn and Heir of Fire, it's not just her learning how to use her magic. It's her stepping into being Aelin. It's her seeing her self-worth. And it's just interesting that like time and time again, we get her POV of herself is bad. Like, yes, she's a badass assassin. And yes, like she can fight and she can defend herself and all these things. And she is really kind to her friends. She's kind to Kale. She's kind to Nehemia. She's kind to Dorian. But at the end of the day, like she doesn't see herself as a good person. And so it's just interesting to like see that develop. It just came up a lot in these chapters of like, she just sees herself in like a really negative way. And it makes me sad. But yeah, those are my final thoughts.
So with that wraps up our deep dives for chapters 11 through 16 of Crown of Midnight. We hope you enjoyed our analysis and theories. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram and TikTok, where our handle is @BookishRealmsPod.
We'd love to hear your thoughts on these chapters, so drop us a comment or send us a message. Also, leave us a rating if you like what you heard. It really helps us out.
Join us next week when we continue our Crown of Midnight deep dive with chapters 17 through 22. Until then, keep reading, assassins.
Bye!